An arrogant man woke up tied in the heart of the forest. He just wanted to escape, but the forest didn't let him forget who he really is. In the heart of Olympic National Forest, where ancient trees whispered secrets of time and mountain streams carved pathways through dense undergrowth, a lone figure lay unconscious against the trunk of a towering cedar. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating the dirt-streaked face of a middle-aged man in torn, dew-dampened clothes. His name was Michael Bennett, one of America's most celebrated eco-entrepreneurs, his face adorning magazine covers and sustainability conferences across the country. His polished image had become synonymous with green innovation, environmental technology, and conscious capitalism. But here, amid this vast living wilderness of Washington state, he was nothing more than a displaced body, confused, vulnerable, and entirely out of place. Michael's eyelids fluttered open. His gaze darted around, uncomprehending. There was no sign of civilization, no trace of his security detail, no remnant of the helicopter he was certain he'd been traveling in the day before. He attempted to stand, only to discover his arms bound tightly with twisted vines, crafted with a skill that made them as secure as metal chains. Before him, watching with calm, animal-like curiosity, stood a girl of about 8 years old, her golden-brown skin weathered by sun and wind, her dark eyes penetrating, her unruly hair framing a face that showed no fear, only interest. She observed him as if accustomed to strange presences in her forest home. Her bare feet connected naturally with the damp earth. Neither spoke for what felt like an eternity, until the girl moved slightly closer, narrowed her eyes, and asked with disarming simplicity, "What are you doing here?" The question echoed in Michael's mind, but he found no answer. His memory felt shrouded in fog, logic obscured by a blank void where yesterday should have been. The girl, however, didn't seem interested in explanations. She turned and vanished among the trees with the same effortless grace with which she'd appeared. Hours passed. Michael tested his bindings repeatedly, wincing as the vines cut into his wrists. The forest breathed around him, birds calling, leaves rustling, streams gurgling in the distance. None of it made sense. He was supposed to be announcing a new regenerative forestry initiative in Seattle. He remembered boarding the private helicopter, remembered the champagne his assistant had poured, remembered checking his speech notes one last time. And then, nothing. "You won't break those," a voice said. Michael jerked his head up to see a woman emerging from the forest. She moved with deliberate steps, her posture serene but authoritative. Her features were strong, weathered by time and experience rather than age, her eyes so deep and knowing that Michael found himself unable to hold her gaze for long. "My name is Sarah," she said. "You are on sacred land." "Look, there's been a mistake," Michael began, his corporate negotiation skills kicking in automatically. "I'm Michael Bennett, CEO of Green Future Technologies. If you have a phone, we can clear this up immediately. My team will be looking for me, and they'll compensate you generously for your help." Sarah's expression didn't change. "There is no mistake. The forest has called you, called me." Michael couldn't suppress a nervous laugh. "I don't know what kind of game this is, but I assure you holding a corporate executive against his will is a federal offense. If it's money you want—" "We have no need for your money," Sarah interrupted. "The land knows who you are. Kurt has been waiting." She nodded to someone Michael couldn't see, and 2 men appeared from behind the trees. They approached cautiously, severing his bindings with stone knives. As the vines fell away, Michael rubbed his wrists, calculating his chances of outrunning them. As if reading his thoughts, Sarah shook her head. "You cannot escape what has already begun. The forest will not let you leave until you have faced your truth. My truth." Michael stood unsteady on his feet. "Listen, I appreciate your spiritual perspective, but I have a company to run. People depend on me. I need to get back." Sarah regarded him with something like pity. "Follow me. Tonight you will eat and rest. Tomorrow you will begin to understand why you are here." Having little choice, Michael followed her through the forest. They walked for nearly an hour, moving deeper into territory unmarked by human trails. He observed Sarah carefully, noting her confident navigation, the way animals seemed undisturbed by her presence, the curious symbols tattooed along her forearms that seemed to shift slightly when she moved through patches of sunlight, though he told himself this was merely a trick of the light. They arrived at a small clearing, where several wooden structures stood in harmony with the surrounding forest. They weren't primitive. Michael recognized sustainable building techniques in their construction, but they appeared purposefully disconnected from modern amenities. A handful of people moved about the settlement, some glancing curiously at Michael, others deliberately avoiding his gaze. The girl from earlier sat cross-legged near a small fire pit, weaving something with nimble fingers. She looked up as they approached. "Lily," Sarah called to her. "Please bring water for our guest." The girl, Lily, nodded once and disappeared into one of the structures. "Is she your daughter?" Michael asked, grasping for any normal conversation. "Lily belongs to the forest," Sarah replied cryptically, "as we all do." "As you once did." Michael felt a chill run through him despite the warm afternoon sun. "I've never been here before." "Your body hasn't," Sarah agreed. "But your blood has." Before Michael could question this bizarre statement, Lily returned with a wooden cup of water. She handed it to him without a word, her eyes studying his face with unnerving intensity. He accepted it gratefully, suddenly aware of his parched throat. As the water touched his lips, something strange happened. For a brief moment, Michael saw not the settlement, but a different place. Tall buildings, document-covered tables, handshakes, bulldozers tearing through green canopy. The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving him gasping. "What was in that water?" he demanded, dropping the cup. Sarah's expression remained unchanged. "Only truth. The first of many you will encounter here." That night, as Michael lay on a surprisingly comfortable mat in one of the structures, he strained to hear any sounds that might indicate civilization. Distant traffic, aircraft overhead, anything. But there was only the symphony of the forest, owls calling, wind through branches, the occasional rustle of nocturnal creatures. Sleep eluded him until exhaustion finally claimed his consciousness. In his dreams, he saw Lily standing before him, older somehow, her childish features transformed into something ancient and knowing. "Why did you come back?" Dream Lily asked, her voice no longer that of a child. "After everything your family did to us?" Michael woke with a start, sweat-soaked despite the cool night air. Outside his dwelling, he could have sworn he saw shadows moving against the natural darkness, not people but shapes that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. He blinked and they were gone. Something was happening to him, something inexplicable, and deep in the recesses of his mind, a voice whispered that whatever awaited him in this forest was something he had been running from his entire life without ever knowing it existed. Morning arrived with a chorus of birdsong and the scent of cedar. Michael sat up, momentarily disoriented before the previous day's events came rushing back. He stepped outside, half expecting to find his captors gone and an opportunity to escape, but instead found the settlement alive with quiet activity. People moved with purpose, gathering plants, tending to small gardens, preparing food, all with an unhurried rhythm that seemed synchronized with the forest itself. Sarah approached, carrying a wooden bowl of berries and nuts. "Few slept longer than most newcomers," she said, offering him breakfast. "Newcomers?" Michael accepted the food cautiously. "You make it sound like I'm not the first person you've brought here." "The forest brings those who need to listen," Sarah replied. "We merely assist in the process." Michael ate slowly, considering his options. His corporate mind instinctively analyzed the situation. These people weren't violent, their settlement was small and sustainable, and they seemed to genuinely believe their mystical explanations. Perhaps compliance was the fastest route to freedom. "So what happens now?" he asked, adopting a cooperative tone. "You mentioned something about me facing my truth. What exactly does that entail?" Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly, seeing through his facade of acceptance. "The forest will show you. But first you should understand where you are." She led him through the settlement, introducing him to some of the residents, about 15 in total. They weren't all of Native American descent, as Michael had initially assumed. They represented diverse backgrounds and ages, unified by their deliberate choice to live in this isolated community. "We are the guardians," Sarah explained, as they walked beyond the settlement's edge. "We maintain balance between worlds that have grown too far apart. This land has been protected by my ancestors for generations, long before your government designated it a national forest." They stopped at a massive cedar tree, its trunk wider than 3 men standing shoulder to shoulder. Its bark was carved with symbols similar to those on Sarah's arms, intricate patterns that seem to shift subtly when viewed from different angles. "This is one of the ancestor trees," Sarah said reverently. "They remember everything that has happened here. They hold wisdom older than human memory." Michael resisted the urge to roll his eyes. As a businessman whose environmental campaigns were built on scientific rigor, mysticism had always struck him as an impediment to practical conservation. Yet something about this place, perhaps the isolation or the lingering strangeness of his arrival, made it harder to dismiss Sarah's words outright. "You claim the forest." "Called me here," he said carefully. "How exactly does a forest issue invitations?" Instead of answering, Sarah placed her palm against the tree's massive trunk and gestured for Michael to do the same. Reluctantly, he complied. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming, a rush of images, sounds, and emotions that weren't his own. He saw the forest through centuries, watched indigenous communities thrive and then suffer, felt the pain of trees being felled and earth being scarred. The visions accelerated through time until he glimpsed familiar faces, his grandfather in a business suit, shaking hands with men in government uniforms, maps spread before them. Then his father, younger than Michael had ever known him, standing before a newly constructed building, champagne glass raised in celebration. Michael yanked his hand away, breathing heavily. What was that? Some kind of hallucinogen on the bark? Sarah regarded him calmly. The trees speak truth. They know your bloodline. Your grandfather, John Bennett, signed agreements that led to the displacement of our people from their traditional lands. Your father expanded those holdings, and now you, with your green technology and sustainability campaigns, continue to build your fortune on stolen ground. That's absurd, Michael snapped. My grandfather was in timber, yes, but everything was legal, and my father transitioned us to sustainable practices decades ago. My own company is at the forefront of environmental restoration. The stories you tell yourself, Sarah said softly. The forest knows different. Before Michael could argue further, a strange sound emanated from deeper in the forest, a rhythmic thumping like a massive heartbeat. Sarah tilted her head, listening. It begins, she murmured. What begins? Michael demanded. Your reckoning. Throughout the day, Michael noticed things he couldn't explain. When no one was watching, he could swear the vegetation moved slightly, creating or obscuring paths depending on his direction. Several times he heard his name whispered from empty sections of forest. At sunset, while helping prepare the community meal, a task Sarah had assigned him despite his protests, he glimpsed strange lights dancing between distant trees, not flashlights or lanterns, but pulsing orbs of blue-green luminescence that vanished when he tried to focus on them. That night, Sarah invited him to a gathering around the central fire pit. The entire community assembled, sitting in silence as she burned herbs that filled the air with a sweet, earthy aroma. Michael took a seat reluctantly, planning to observe without participating in whatever ceremony was about to take place. Sarah began to sing in a language Michael didn't recognize. Others joined her, their voices blending in harmonies that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Lily sat directly across from Michael, her eyes reflecting the firelight in an almost preternatural way. As the singing continued, Michael felt a strange lightness spread through his body. He wasn't sleepy or disoriented, quite the opposite. His senses sharpened. The firelight became more vivid, the singing more dimensional, the forest around them more alive. And then the visions began. He saw boardrooms where he'd presented his company's environmental initiatives, but now could hear the skeptical whispers of executives after he'd left. He witnessed the construction of his green manufacturing facilities, but now saw the habitats destroyed in the process. Most disturbingly, he observed meetings he had no memory of attending, where his signature authorized projects that contradicted everything his public image stood for. When the singing stopped, Michael found himself trembling, his face wet with tears he didn't remember shedding. The community members were watching him, their expressions not judgmental but waiting, as if his reaction was a crucial part of the ritual. What did you see? Sarah asked quietly. Michael wiped his face, embarrassed and unsettled. Nothing. Tricks of the light. Whatever you burned is clearly psychoactive. Sarah nodded to Lily, who approached Michael with a small wooden box. Inside was a smooth stone pendant on a leather cord. Simple but beautifully crafted. Wear this, Sarah instructed. It belonged to your mother. Michael froze. My mother? That's impossible. My mother was Caroline Bennett. She was from Boston, not... He gestured vaguely at the forest. The woman who raised you was not your birth mother, Sarah said gently. Your blood comes from this place, from our people. That's a lie, Michael said flatly, though a cold sensation spread through his chest. My parents were Michael and Caroline Bennett Sr. I have birth certificates, photographs, a lifetime of... Arrangements were made, Sarah interrupted. A child was given to a powerful family, to be raised without knowledge of her origins. That child was your mother. You are her son. And now the forest has called you home to restore what was broken. Michael stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. I'm leaving in the morning, and if you try to stop me, I'll have this entire operation investigated. Whatever game you're playing. It is no game, Lily spoke for the first time since their initial meeting. Her voice was soft, but carried an authority beyond her years. The forest doesn't lie. You belong here. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He paced inside his dwelling, the stone pendant clutched in his hand. It was just a stone, he told himself, just a prop in an elaborate deception. Yet something about it felt familiar in a way he couldn't articulate, as if he'd held it before long ago. Outside, the forest seemed more awake than ever. Whispers surrounded his dwelling. When he peered through the doorway, he saw symbols glowing faintly on tree trunks, the same patterns that adorned Sarah's arms. And somewhere in the distance, the rhythmic thumping continued, like the heartbeat of something vast and ancient, calling him deeper into mystery. Dawn had barely broken when Michael decided to make his escape. He had spent the night formulating a plan. Wait until first light when visibility would be best, head downhill consistently, which should eventually lead to water, and follow any stream or river until reaching civilization. Simple wilderness survival tactics he'd learned during a corporate retreat years ago. The settlement was quiet as he slipped away, moving as silently as possible through the underbrush. He had no supplies, no compass, no phone, but his determination to return to his normal life outweighed these concerns. The forest felt different in the early morning, misty, primordial, with shafts of golden light penetrating the canopy. Under different circumstances, he might have appreciated its beauty. After an hour of steady hiking, Michael paused to get his bearings. The sun should be rising in the east, giving him a directional reference point. But when he looked up, confusion set in. The sun seemed to be in the wrong position relative to his course. He shook his head, attributing the disorientation to stress, and continued downhill. 2 hours later, frustration began to mount. He should have reached a road, a trail marker, or at least a stream by now. The Olympic National Forest was vast, but it was riddled with hiking trails and access roads. It wasn't the Amazon, for God's sake. Come on, he muttered, pushing through a dense patch of ferns. There has to be... He stopped abruptly. Ahead of him stood the massive cedar tree Sarah had shown him the previous day, the ancestor tree with its carved symbols. Somehow, impossibly, he had walked in a circle. That's not possible, he said aloud. He was certain he'd maintained a straight course downhill. A rustling sound drew his attention. Lily emerged from behind the cedar, regarding him with that same penetrating stare. The forest won't let you leave, she said simply, as if explaining something obvious to a child. Not until you complete the journey. Michael felt anger rising. Listen, I don't know what kind of tricks your people are playing, moving me while I was unconscious, creating false landmarks, but this has gone far enough. Lily's expression didn't change. No tricks, just truth. Look at your arms. Michael glanced down reflexively and froze. Faint markings had appeared on his skin, similar to the symbols carved on the tree, but more subtle, like pale scars emerging from beneath the surface. He rubbed at them frantically, but they didn't smudge or fade. What is this? He demanded, his voice rising with panic. What did you do to me? We did nothing, Lily replied. The forest is claiming you. It's in your blood now. She turned and began walking back toward the settlement. Come, Sarah is waiting. Having little choice and unnerved by the markings, Michael followed. As they walked, he noticed more details that had escaped his attention previously. The trees seemed to bend slightly inward as they passed, like spectators leaning in for a better view. Birds fell silent when they approached, then erupted in chatter once they had passed. Most disturbing of all, Certain rocks and fallen logs appeared to have shifted position since his escape attempt began, as if the entire forest was rearranging itself around him. When they reached the settlement, Sarah was sitting, alone outside her dwelling, weaving what looked like a basket from cedar bark. She didn't look up as they approached. "You tried to leave," she stated. Not a question. "The forest brought him back," Lily announced, then disappeared into one of the other structures. Sarah finally raised her eyes to meet Michael's. "Did you see now? This place won't release you until your purpose here is fulfilled." Michael held out his arms, displaying the strange markings. "What is this? Some kind of toxic plant reaction? Or did you drug me in my sleep?" "Those are the marks of belonging," Sarah said, setting her weaving aside. "They appear when the forest recognizes its own. They will grow stronger as you accept your connection to this place." "I have no connection to this place," Michael exploded. "I'm a business executive from Seattle. I build green technology. I have meetings and deadlines and responsibilities. Whatever game you're playing, sit," Sarah commanded with such authority that Michael found himself complying before he could think better of it. She studied him for a long moment. "Your dreams last night, tell me about them." Michael opened his mouth to deny having dreams, but found himself speaking truth instead. "I saw a woman, Native American, with a necklace like the one you showed me. She was crying while holding a baby. Then the baby was gone and she was alone." Sarah nodded slowly. "That woman was your grandmother, Hannah. The baby was your mother, Emma. She was born here among our people. Your grandfather took her away when she was only a few months old, part of a deal he made with our tribe's former chief, his business partner." "That's impossible," Michael whispered, but with less conviction than before. "My mother's name was Catherine. She was from a wealthy Boston family." "Catherine Bennett was the name given to her by her adoptive family," Sarah continued. "Emma Wildheart was the name given to her by her true mother. Your blood is of this place, Michael. That is why the forest called you back." She reached out and touched one of the markings on Michael's forearm. "These are the symbols of your mother's clan. The forest remembers what humans forget." Michael pulled his arm away. "Even if what you're saying is true, which I don't believe for a second, what does it have to do with holding me hostage? What do you want from me?" "It's not what we want," Sarah said. "Here's what the forest needs: balance, restoration, truth." She stood. "Tonight we will perform a cleansing ritual. It will help you remember." The day passed with Michael alternating between anger, disbelief, and growing unease. He attempted to use logic to counter the impossibilities surrounding him, but found it increasingly difficult. The markings on his arms had darkened slightly, becoming more distinct. When he tried once more to leave the settlement, this time in broad daylight, with no attempt at stealth, he found himself walking in circles again, always returning to the ancestor tree. Other strange occurrences mounted. While helping gather berries, a task assigned by Sarah that he had grudgingly accepted, he distinctly heard someone whispering his name, though no one was nearby. Bending to examine a plant, he caught his reflection in a small pool of water, except the face looking back at him seemed older, wearier, with symbols similar to Sarah's tattooed across the forehead. He jerked back, and the reflection returned to normal. That evening, the community gathered at a small spring hidden within a grove of ancient trees. The water bubbled up crystal clear from deep within the earth, filling a natural stone basin before flowing away as a stream. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the water's surface. Sarah instructed Michael to remove his shirt. The markings had spread across his chest now, forming patterns that seemed to pulse slightly in the moonlight. The community formed a circle around the spring, and Sarah began to sing, the same haunting melody from the previous night's ritual. This time, instead of burning herbs, she crushed various plants into the spring water, which began to emit a soft, blue-green glow. "Enter the water," she told Michael. "No way," he refused, backing up. "I'm not getting into whatever chemically altered—" Before he could finish, Lily stepped forward with a small wooden object in her hands, a carved toy horse, weathered with age. "This was yours," she said, holding it out. Michael stared at it, recognition dawning despite his rational mind's protest. He had owned a toy horse exactly like this as a child, a gift he'd believed came from his father. It had been his favorite possession until it disappeared when he was about 7 years old. "How did you get this?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "You brought it with you," Lily replied. "The first time you were here, the revelation hit Michael like a physical blow. Fragments of memory surfaced. A childhood visit to the Olympic forest with his parents, wandering away from their campsite, meeting a group of people who seemed to know him, being returned to his frantic parents hours later. His mother's face, tight with fear that transformed into something more complex when she saw who had found him. "I was here before," he murmured, taking the wooden horse with trembling fingers. "And when I was a child," Sarah nodded. "Your mother brought you once, secretly. She wanted you to know your heritage, even if only for a day. Your father found out and never allowed her to return." The pieces began to fit together. His mother's unexplained interest in Native American culture, her collection of books about the Olympic Peninsula, her strained relationship with his father that he'd never understood. Even her final request before her passing 5 years ago, to have her ashes scattered in a forest rather than interred in the Bennett family mausoleum. Without further protest, Michael stepped into the spring. The water was surprisingly warm, enveloping him like an embrace. As he submerged himself to the shoulders, the markings on his skin began to glow with the same luminescence as the water. And with that glow came more memories, not his own but older, passed through bloodlines. He saw his mother as a baby, his grandmother's tears, his grandfather's stern face as papers were signed. He felt the forest's pain as trees were felled, saw machines tearing into the earth, heard the protests of people being removed from their ancestral homes. When he emerged from the water minutes later, Michael Bennett was not the same man who had entered it. The corporate executive remained, but now stood alongside something older, something connected to this place in ways his rational mind was only beginning to comprehend. Sarah handed him a blanket. "Now you begin to see, but there is more truth waiting. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we travel deeper." That night, for the first time since arriving, Michael slept deeply and without resistance. In his dreams, he walked through the forest alongside a woman he somehow knew was his grandmother. She spoke no words, but led him to a massive fallen tree, pointing to something hidden within its hollow core. When he reached inside, his fingers closed around cold metal, something manufactured, something that didn't belong in this primal place. He tried to withdraw it to see what it was, but woke before he could. Dawn brought clarity and purpose. Michael no longer fought against the forest's claim on him. Now he needed to understand it. After a simple breakfast of wild berries and nuts, Sarah approached Michael with purpose in her stride. "Today we walk to the heart," she announced. "It's time you saw what your family has tried to hide for generations." Michael nodded, no longer resisting. The markings on his skin had continued to develop overnight. Intricate patterns now covered his arms and chest, visible reminders of a heritage he'd never known. He'd spent the early morning hours examining them in the reflection of a still pond, tracing their contours with his fingers, feeling a strange sense of rightness in their presence. Sarah led him away from the settlement, with Lily trailing silently behind them. They hiked for hours, moving through parts of the forest that showed no signs of human trails. Michael noticed how Sarah navigated by subtle markers that would be invisible to untrained eyes. A bent branch here, a particular arrangement of stones there. The forest seemed to open pathways before them and close them after they passed. "How much farther?" Michael asked as the sun climbed higher. "Distance is not measured in steps here," Sarah replied cryptically. "We arrive when the forest decides we are ready." Around midday, they reached a stream that gleamed unusually bright in the sunlight. Sarah knelt beside it, cupping water in her hands and drinking deeply. She gestured for Michael to do the same. The water tasted like no water he had ever experienced, sweeter, somehow older, charged with an energy he could feel spreading through his body. As he drank, the markings on his skin pulsed once strongly. "Memory water," Lily said, speaking for the first time that day. "It helps you see truth." They continued onward, the terrain growing steeper. The trees changed subtly, older growth, more moss-covered, with trunks so wide they sometimes had to circle around rather than pass between them. The air grew heavier, filled with scents of earth and decay and renewal. Finally, they emerged into a hidden valley encircled by ancient trees that seemed to stand as sentinels. At the center stood a massive stump, all that remained of a tree that must have been the giant of giants. Its surface was smooth, polished by time and weather, and carved with symbols more complex than any Michael had yet seen. Around the stumps smaller, stones formed a perfect circle. "The heart of the forest," Sarah said, her voice hushed with reverence. "Once the greatest tree in the Olympic Peninsula stood here. It was old when the first humans arrived. It witnessed centuries of peace before the arrival of those who saw trees only as lumber and land only as property." Michael approached the stump slowly, drawn by an inexplicable pull. "What happened to it?" Sarah's expression darkened. "Your grandfather happened to it. John Bennett ordered it cut down in 1962, despite treaty protections and despite knowing what it meant to our people. Its wood became the central beams of his first timber company headquarters, a display of power and ownership. The revelation struck Michael like a physical blow. He had visited that building as a child, had been proud of its soaring central hall with massive exposed beams that his father had always pointed to as symbols of the Bennett legacy. "I didn't know," he whispered. "Of course you didn't," Sarah replied without accusation. "The victors write the histories their children learn." Lily stepped forward, standing beside Michael at the stump's edge. "Put your hands on it," she instructed. "The heart remembers everything." Michael hesitated only briefly before placing his palms flat against the polished wood surface. Immediately a surge of images flooded his consciousness. Not chaotic visions like before, but a coherent narrative unfolding before his mind's eye. He saw the valley as it had been centuries ago, teeming with wildlife, respected by indigenous people who took only what they needed. He witnessed the arrival of European settlers, then logging companies, then his own grandfather, young, ambitious, ruthless in his pursuit of timber rights. He watched secret meetings where John Bennett manipulated tribal leaders, offering money and empty promises in exchange for access to protected lands. Most painful of all, Michael witnessed his grandfather's relationship with a young tribal woman, Hannah Wildheart, Sarah's sister and his own grandmother. Their affair had produced a child, Emma, his mother, who became a bargaining chip in John Bennett's business dealings. The agreement was brutal in its simplicity. John would gain exclusive logging rights to certain sacred areas, and in exchange, he would take the child to be raised in privilege, away from her heritage, with the understanding that she would never learn of her origins. When the visions subsided, Michael found himself on his knees, tears streaming down his face. "He stole her," he gasped. "He stole my mother." Sarah's hand rested on his shoulder. "Yes, and he stole much more, but the forest has waited patiently for restoration. That is why you are here." Michael looked up at her, understanding dawning. "You're my aunt." "My mother's half-sister," Sarah nodded. "I was just a child when Emma was taken. Our mother, your grandmother, never recovered from the loss. She walked into these woods a few years later and became part of the forest. That is our way when grief becomes too heavy to carry." "And Lily?" Michael asked, looking at the solemn-faced girl. "Lily is a forest daughter," Sarah explained, "born of those who chose to join with the trees rather than leave their homeland. She exists between worlds as you now begin to." Michael stood, suddenly recalling his dream from the previous night. "There's something hidden in a fallen tree," he said. "I saw it in my dream, something metal, something that doesn't belong." Sarah and Lily exchanged glances. "The forest is showing you the path," Sarah said. "Can you find this tree?" Strangely, Michael felt certain that he could. Something was guiding him now, a knowledge that came not from his mind but from the markings that covered his skin, from the water he had drunk, from the ancient stump that had shared its memories. He led them away from the heart, moving with newfound confidence through the dense forest. They walked for nearly an hour until Michael stopped abruptly before a massive fallen cedar, its trunk split open to reveal a hollow core. Without hesitation, he knelt and reached inside. His fingers closed around something cool and rectangular. He withdrew a metal box, sealed against the elements with some kind of industrial waterproofing. It was surprisingly heavy in his hands. "Open it," Lily urged, her eyes wide with anticipation. The box's seal had weakened with time, and Michael managed to pry it open without much difficulty. Inside, protected by layers of plastic, was a tablet computer, an older model but potentially still functional. Alongside it was a portable battery pack and charging cable. "This doesn't make sense," Michael murmured, turning the device over in his hands. Modern technology wouldn't be hidden in the forest unless someone wanted to preserve information, Sarah finished. Someone who feared it might be destroyed otherwise. Michael connected the battery pack to the tablet and held his breath as he pressed the power button. After a moment that felt like eternity, the screen glowed to life. The tablet was locked, requiring a password. Michael stared at it, momentarily defeated, until Lily pointed to a small note tucked into the box's interior. On it was written a single word: Emma, his mother's birth name. Michael entered it, and the tablet unlocked to reveal dozens of folders meticulously organized. He opened the first one labeled Bennett Timber Financial Records. What he found made his blood run cold. Here were detailed records of his grandfather's company, and later his father's, and now his own, documenting decades of environmental violations, bribes to officials, falsified environmental impact reports, and systematic exploitation of treaty loopholes to gain access to protected lands. Most damning of all were records related to his own company, Green Future Technologies. Behind the facade of sustainability and conservation, the documents revealed that Michael's signature green energy initiatives were often carefully engineered covers for continued resource extraction in sensitive areas. Projects he'd believed were creating sustainable infrastructure were, in reality, opening new channels for exploitation. "I didn't know," he whispered, scrolling through file after damning file. "I swear I didn't know." "Perhaps not consciously," Sarah said gently, "but the forest believes you suspected. That is why it called you, because you alone in your family might be willing to see the truth and make amends." Michael looked up, confusion clouding his features. "Who created these records? Who hid this tablet?" "Your mother," Sarah replied. "Emma never fully forgot her origins, though your father tried to ensure she would. She began investigating the family business years ago, collecting evidence, planning to expose everything. But she fell ill before she could act. That's why she asked to have her ashes scattered in a forest," Michael realized, pieces falling into place. "She was trying to come home." He continued examining the tablet, opening another folder labeled DNA Results. Inside was genetic testing confirmation that Catherine Bennett, his mother, was indeed the biological daughter of Hannah Wildheart and John Bennett. There were also adoption papers, falsified to create a fictional Boston lineage for the child. As the sun began its descent, they made their way back to the settlement. Michael clutched the tablet to his chest like a precious artifact, which in many ways it was. It represented not only his mother's final act of resistance, but also his own inheritance, the truth he had never known he was seeking. That night, as the community gathered around the fire, Michael found himself thinking about the empire he had helped build, the Bennett legacy that stretched from destructive logging practices to the supposedly green technologies his company now championed. All of it built on stolen land, broken promises, and a foundation of lies so deep he had never thought to question them. The markings on his skin now covered his entire torso, extending up his neck and onto his jawline. When he touched them, he felt connected to something vast and ancient, a wisdom that transcended human concerns of profit and property. "Tomorrow," Sarah said, as the gathering dispersed for the night, "you must make your choice. The forest has shown you the past. Now it waits to see what future you will create." As Michael lay on his mat that night, the tablet powered down beside him, he heard the forest's heartbeat more clearly than ever. The rhythmic pulsing that had haunted his arrival now felt like his own heart's echo. The whispers in the darkness were no longer threatening, but familiar, like half-remembered conversations from childhood. He dreamed of his mother, not as the proper, somewhat distant Catherine Bennett he had known, but as Emma Wildheart, the daughter of the forest. In the dream, she stood by the massive stump at the heart, her hand outstretched toward him. "There's still time," Dream Emma told him. "The cycle can be broken." When Michael woke before dawn, his decision was made. Whatever came next would change everything. His life, his company, his understanding of himself. But for the first time since arriving in the forest, he felt no fear of that transformation. Dawn broke with a heavy mist clinging to the trees, transforming the forest into a realm of shadows and secrets. Michael sat outside his dwelling, the tablet on his lap, methodically reviewing every document his mother had compiled. The evidence was irrefutable: 3 generations of environmental exploitation disguised with increasingly sophisticated greenwashing. His own company, Green Future Technologies, represented the culmination of this evolution, a corporation that publicly championed sustainability while privately continuing the family tradition of extraction and destruction. "How could I not have known?" he whispered to the morning air. "Because you chose not to see," Sarah replied, approaching silently through the mist. "Humans have remarkable capacity for blindness when truth threatens comfort." Michael didn't argue. The markings on his skin had continued to evolve overnight. The intricate patterns now covered most of his body, and when he caught his reflection in water, he barely recognized himself. He had stopped fighting their presence. They felt more authentic than the designer suits and polished image he'd cultivated for years. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you face the council," Sarah answered. "The oldest trees have gathered their wisdom. They will judge what must be done to restore balance." She led him deeper into the forest than he had yet ventured, to a grove so ancient the trees seemed to exist outside of time itself. Their massive trunks were gnarled with age, their canopies forming a cathedral-like dome overhead. The entire community followed, moving in solemn procession. At the center of the grove stood 7 tree stumps arranged in a semicircle. Upon each sat a community elder, men and women of various ages whose eyes held the same ancient wisdom Michael had observed in Sarah and Lily. These, he understood instinctively, were the human representatives of the council. Sarah directed Michael to stand before them, then took her place on one of the stumps. Lily positioned herself directly behind him, a silent guardian. The oldest man, white-haired and weathered but with eyes sharp as a hawk's, spoke first. Michael Bennett, son of Catherine, who was born Emma Wildheart, grandson of Hannah of the ancient bloodline, and John of the Outsiders. You stand at the convergence of worlds in conflict. The forest has marked you as one who might heal the breach. Do you accept this burden? The formality of the address surprised Michael, but he found himself responding with equal gravity. "I accept it, though I don't fully understand what's required of me." A woman with silver-streaked black hair nodded approvingly. "Understanding comes through action, not contemplation. The question is whether you are willing to act against your own interests for the sake of justice." "Show them," Sarah instructed, gesturing to the tablet Michael still carried. One by one, Michael presented the evidence his mother had gathered: the falsified environmental reports, the secret land acquisitions through shell companies, the bribery of officials, the systematic violation of indigenous rights. He held nothing back, including the most recent documents that implicated him directly in continuing these practices. "I believed our company had changed," he explained, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I thought our green initiatives represented a genuine break from my grandfather's and father's methods. Now I see they were just more sophisticated versions of the same exploitation." The elders listened without interruption, their expressions unreadable. When Michael finished, silence fell over the grove, a silence so complete it seemed the forest itself was holding its breath. Finally, the oldest woman spoke, her voice surprisingly strong. "The Bennett legacy has brought much suffering to this land and its people. 3 generations of broken promises and stolen futures. What do you propose as restitution?" Michael had spent the night considering this very question. "Complete transparency," he began. "I'll publicly release all these documents, acknowledge the crimes committed by my family and company, and accept whatever legal consequences follow." The elders nodded, but their expressions suggested this was merely a starting point. "Beyond that," Michael continued, "I'll transfer ownership of all Bennett land holdings in the Olympic Peninsula back to the tribal authorities, with legally binding conservation easements to prevent future development. I'll redirect Green Future's resources toward genuine restoration projects designed and led by indigenous experts. And I'll establish a trust fund for cultural preservation and environmental education, controlled entirely by tribal councils." A younger elder leaned forward. "And what of your own future, Michael Bennett? Once you've dismantled your empire, what remains for you?" The question struck at the heart of Michael's identity crisis. Who was he, if not the CEO of Green Future, the culmination of the Bennett legacy? The markings on his skin seemed to pulse in response to his uncertainty. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I'm beginning to understand that who I've been is not who I was meant to be." Sarah stood from her place among the elders. "The forest offers another path. You carry the blood of both worlds, destructor and protector. You could serve as a bridge between them, helping others see what you now see." Before Michael could respond, a strange sound filled the grove, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the trees themselves. The elders closed their eyes, listening intently. Even Lily, still standing behind Michael, tilted her head in concentration. "The Council of Trees has spoken," the oldest man announced when the sound faded. "Michael Bennett must complete 3 tasks to restore balance: truth, restitution, and renewal." He explained each task in turn. Truth meant publicly revealing everything Michael had learned, regardless of personal cost. Restitution required returning what had been taken: land, resources, cultural artifacts, and making amends for what could not be restored. Renewal was more enigmatic. Michael would need to ensure the forest's wisdom and protection continued into future generations. "If you succeed," the man concluded, "the forest will release you from its claim. If you fail or attempt to escape your responsibility, the markings will remain, visible proof of your broken promise to any who have eyes to see." The implications were clear. Michael could return to his world, but he would never again be the man he was before entering the forest. The markings ensured that his transformation was irrevocable. "I accept these tasks," Michael stated, surprised by the certainty in his voice. As if in response, the markings on his skin flared with momentary brightness. Several elders nodded in approval. The formal council concluded, and the community began the long walk back to the settlement. As they traveled, Michael found himself walking alongside Lily. "Did you know who I was from the beginning?" he asked her. She nodded. "The forest told me. It's been waiting for you for a long time. You said I belonged here," Michael recalled their first conversation. "Did you mean permanently?" Lily considered this with the seriousness that made her seem far older than her years. "The belonging isn't about where your body stays," she finally replied. "It's about where your spirit recognizes itself." That evening, as the community prepared for Michael's departure the following day, Sarah presented him with several items: the stone pendant that had belonged to his mother, a small pouch of earth from the heart of the forest, and a newly carved wooden emblem bearing the same symbols that now marked his skin. "These will remind you of your promise when the outside world tries to make you forget," she explained. Michael accepted them gratefully. "What if I fail? What if the corporate lawyers and PR teams spin everything, bury the evidence, protect the company at my expense?" Sarah's expression was serene but unyielding. "The forest didn't choose you because success would be easy. It chose you because you have the strength to persevere, even when the path seems impossible." Later, alone in his dwelling, Michael powered up the tablet one last time. Beyond the damning corporate documents, he discovered a folder he hadn't noticed before, labeled simply Emma. Inside were personal journals his mother had kept for years, documenting her gradually recovering memories of her origins, her investigations into the Bennett family history, and her growing determination to make things right before her illness claimed her. The final entry, dated just 2 weeks before her passing, read, "Michael must be the one to finish what I've started. He has his father's mind for strategy, but something else too. Something from my bloodline that I've glimpsed in rare moments when he thinks no one is watching. A connection to something beyond profit margins and corporate expansion. I'm leaving this record where the forest can guard it until he's ready to see the truth. Mother Forest, guide him home when the time comes." Michael closed the journal, tears blurring his vision. His mother had known, had planned for this moment, had believed in his capacity for transformation even when he himself had been blind to it. Outside, night had fallen fully. The forest breathed around the settlement, alive with subtle movements and whispers. For the first time, Michael didn't find these sounds eerie or threatening. They were conversations he was only beginning to understand, a language older than words that resonated with the markings on his skin. Tomorrow, he would return to Seattle, to board meetings and press conferences, to lawyers and shareholders, to the dismantling of everything he had spent his life building. The path ahead would require courage of a kind he'd never needed in corporate boardrooms. But tonight, he belonged to the forest. And for the first time since arriving, That knowledge brought peace rather than resistance. 6 months had passed since Michael Bennett had walked out of the Olympic National Forest, a changed man carrying evidence that would shake the corporate world to its foundations. The headlines had been relentless. Green tech CEO exposes own company's environmental crimes. Bennett heir dismantles family empire. Corporate whistleblower cites spiritual awakening in forest. Michael stood at the window of his much smaller Seattle apartment, gazing at the distant silhouette of Mount Rainier. He no longer occupied the penthouse that had once symbolized his success. That property, along with most of his personal assets, had been liquidated to fund the restitution efforts he'd promised the council. The markings on his skin had faded somewhat, but remained visible, a permanent reminder of his covenant with the forest. He kept them covered in public, though occasionally someone would glimpse the patterns at his wristline or collar and look at him with curiosity. In private, he had come to view them not as a burden but as a gift, a tangible connection to a wisdom most people never encountered. A knock at the door interrupted his reflection. His assistant, Diane, entered with an expression that had become familiar, a mixture of respect and bewilderment at what her boss had become. "The lawyers are here," she announced. "They've finalized the transfer documents for the Olympic Peninsula properties." Michael nodded. "Send them in." The meeting was brief and businesslike. With a few signatures, the last major holdings of what had once been the Bennett Empire were officially transferred to the newly established Olympic Forest Trust, a conservation entity jointly managed by tribal authorities and environmental experts, with legally binding protections that would prevent development for generations to come. "That concludes the transfer," his lawyer stated, gathering the documents. "I must advise you again, Mr. Bennett, that these actions are essentially irreversible. The shareholders' lawsuits are still pending, and this further diminishes any resources you might have used for your defense." Michael fingered the wooden emblem he now wore on a cord around his neck, alongside his mother's stone pendant. "I'm aware of the consequences," he replied calmly. "Send copies of everything to the tribal council representatives." After the lawyers departed, Diane lingered. "There's something else," she said hesitantly. "A girl is here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she insists you'll want to speak with her. Says her name is Lily." Michael's heart quickened. "Send her in immediately." Moments later, Lily entered his office. She looked strangely out of place among the modern furnishings, still barefoot, still carrying herself with that preternatural composure. Yet she'd made concessions to urban life. She wore simple jeans and a t-shirt instead of the hand-woven garments she'd worn in the forest. "Lily," Michael greeted her warmly. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Sarah sent me," she replied directly. "It's time for the third task." Michael had completed the first 2 tasks the council had assigned him. Truth had come in the form of a comprehensive public disclosure, press conferences, regulatory filings, congressional testimony. He had held nothing back, accepting full personal responsibility while exposing the systematic abuses his family had perpetuated across generations. Restitution had been equally thorough. Beyond returning land and establishing conservation trusts, he had surrendered patents, redirected research funding to indigenous-led initiatives, and established scholarship programs for Native American youth interested in environmental science and traditional ecological knowledge. But the third task, renewal, had remained enigmatic. Ensuring the forest's wisdom and protection continued into future generations could mean almost anything. "What does Sarah say I should do?" Michael asked, gesturing for Lily to sit. Lily remained standing. "She doesn't say. The forest says. You need to come back." "Back to the settlement? Now?" Lily nodded. "The cycle is almost complete." Michael glanced at his calendar. Meetings with attorneys, interviews with journalists, a scheduled appearance before a Senate committee investigating environmental compliance in the tech sector. His public transformation from corporate leader to whistleblower had made him both a pariah in business circles and a reluctant hero to environmental activists. "I can't just disappear again," he explained. "There are still responsibilities I need to address here." Lily's expression remained impassive. "The forest doesn't recognize your human schedules. The time is now." Something in her tone brooked no argument. Michael remembered Sarah's words from months ago. The forest didn't choose you because success would be easy. Give me an hour, he conceded. 90 minutes later, Michael and Lily were in his modest car, heading west toward the Olympic Peninsula. He had cancelled his appointments, left Diane with instructions for handling urgent matters, and packed a small bag. Lily sat silently in the passenger seat, occasionally closing her eyes as if listening to something only she could hear. "How is Sarah?" Michael asked, breaking the silence as they crossed the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. "And the others at the settlement." "They continue," Lily replied simply. "The forest provides. And how did you find me?" "How did you even get to Seattle?" A hint of a smile crossed Lily's face. "The forest has many friends, even in cities." They drove for hours, eventually leaving paved roads for logging tracks, and finally abandoning the car altogether to hike the last few miles. As they walked, Michael felt the familiar quickening in his blood, the markings on his skin warming as if greeting old friends. The forest's whispers welcomed him back, not as a stranger or intruder now, but as kin returning home. The settlement appeared unchanged, as if the months that had transformed Michael's life had been mere moments here. Sarah waited at its edge, her ageless eyes taking in his city clothes, his shorter hair, the new lines of stress on his face. "You've honored your promises," she said by way of greeting. "The forest is pleased." Michael touched the markings on his forearm. "I could feel it, even in Seattle. Especially when the news reported that the logging operations near the heart had been permanently halted." Sarah nodded. "That was significant, but the third task remains unfulfilled. Come, the council awaits." This time, the journey to the ancient grove took a different path. Sarah led him through areas of the forest he hadn't seen before. Younger growth reclaiming cleared land, saplings pushing through soil that bore the scars of industrial equipment, signs of healing, of nature's resilience when given the chance to recover. The Council of Elders had assembled as before, seated on the ancient stumps. But this time they were not alone. Behind them stood dozens of people Michael didn't recognize, men and women of various ages, some clearly Native American, others not, all watching him with solemn intensity. "Who are they?" Michael whispered to Sarah. "Others like you," she replied, "those who carry the blood of both worlds, those who chose to remember rather than forget." The oldest elder rose to greet them. "Michael Bennett, you have returned as promised. You have spoken truth to those who would prefer comfortable lies. You have begun the work of restitution for generations of taking without giving. Now comes the most difficult task, renewal." He gestured to the assembled observers. "For too long, the wisdom of the forest has been dismissed as superstition, while the knowledge of your world has been wielded as a weapon against nature. Neither path alone can heal what has been broken. The third task requires you to become the bridge, to create a new way forward that honors both traditions." Michael frowned. "I don't understand what that means in practical terms." Another elder spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "It means you cannot simply dismantle what was wrong and then walk away. You must help build what comes next. The renewal is not just of the forest, but of the relationship between humans and the natural world." Gradually, the full scope of the third task became clear. Michael was being asked to establish a new kind of institution, not a business, not a charity, but something that transcended existing models. A place where indigenous ecological knowledge and modern environmental science could be integrated, where future generations could learn to be stewards rather than exploiters, where the forest's wisdom could be translated into terms the outside world might understand and respect. "This is the work of a lifetime," Michael said, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they proposed. "Yes," Sarah agreed simply. "That is precisely what the forest asks of you." That night, a ceremony unlike any Michael had witnessed before took place at the heart of the forest. The massive stump that had once been the greatest tree in the Olympic Peninsula became the focal point for a ritual of commitment. One by one, those who had gathered behind the council came forward to share their stories, children and grandchildren of indigenous people who had been displaced, adopted away, or forced to assimilate. Like Michael, they had discovered their heritage later in life. Like him, they had felt the forest's call. Some bore markings similar to his own, others carried their connection in less visible ways. When it came Michael's turn to speak, He found himself sharing not just his commitment to the tasks ahead, but the profound transformation he had undergone. 6 months ago, I thought I knew who I was, he told the assembly. A successful businessman, an environmental innovator, a credit to the Bennett name. Now I understand that identity was built on lies, lies others told me and lies I told myself. He touched the markings that spiraled across his skin. These forced me to confront a truth I had been running from all my life, that we cannot heal our relationship with the natural world until we heal our relationship with ourselves and our past. The corporate empire I helped build was just the latest expression of a sickness that began generations ago, the belief that humans can own nature rather than belonging to it. As he spoke, the markings began to glow softly in the gathering darkness. Around the circle, similar patterns illuminated on the skin of others, a constellation of ancient symbols connecting them to each other and to the forest itself. Sarah stepped into the center of the circle, carrying a small ceramic bowl filled with a luminescent liquid similar to what Michael had seen in the spring months earlier. Tonight, you all renew your covenant with the forest, she announced, and the forest renews its covenant with you. Each of you will carry its wisdom back to your communities, your workplaces, your families. Each of you will be both messenger and guardian. She approached Michael first, dipping her fingers into the glowing liquid and tracing a final symbol on his forehead. Michael Bennett, grandson of Hannah Wildheart, the forest accepts your promise of renewal. Go forth as a bridge builder between worlds. As the liquid touched his skin, Michael felt a profound shift within himself, not the disorienting visions of his first days in the forest, but a clarity that seemed to connect all the fragments of his life into a coherent whole. He understood now that his corporate expertise, his scientific knowledge, his newfound connection to his indigenous heritage, all were tools for the work ahead. The ceremony continued until each person had received a similar marking and designation. Some were named healers, others teachers, others protectors, each role unique but interconnected in the larger purpose of renewal. As dawn approached, the assembly began to disperse. Some would return to their lives in the outside world, carrying the forest's wisdom with them. Others would remain in the settlement, maintaining the ancient traditions. All were now bound in a network of purpose that transcended individual identity. Sarah approached Michael as he gathered his few belongings. The markings will fade from visibility over time, she told him, but their essence remains. You will always be connected to this place, to these people, to this purpose. Will I see you again? Michael asked. When the forest calls, you will know, she replied. And now you will know how to listen. As Michael prepared to depart, Lily appeared at his side. The solemn child who had found him unconscious months ago now regarded him with something like pride. The beginning is always hard, she said in her direct way. But you're not alone anymore. Michael knelt to meet her eye to eye. Will you visit sometimes? To make sure I'm keeping my promises. A rare smile transformed her serious face. The forest will be watching. So will I. 1 year later, on a crisp autumn day, Michael stood on a ridge overlooking the Olympic forest. Behind him, the framework of a new building was taking shape, the first physical manifestation of the Bridge Builder Institute. Designed with input from indigenous architects and environmental engineers, it would serve as headquarters for the network of renewal efforts now spreading across the Pacific Northwest and beyond. The legal battles were ongoing, the resistance from corporate interests fierce, the path forward still uncertain in many ways. But Michael no longer measured success in quarterly profits or stock valuations. Time moved differently for him now. He thought in terms of generations, of centuries, of the slow, patient renewal the forest had taught him to value. The markings on his skin had indeed faded from their initial vivid appearance, but they remained visible to those who knew what to look for. More importantly, they remained active, warming when he was on the right path, guiding him when human concerns threatened to overwhelm the deeper purpose. Sometimes, in dreams, he still walked with his mother, not Catherine Bennett of Boston, but Emma Wildheart, the child of two worlds who had tried in her own way to bridge the divide. In these dreams, she showed him places in the forest he had never physically visited, introduced him to ancestors whose names had been erased from family records, taught him words in a language his tongue was slowly learning to shape. And sometimes, when the work seemed impossibly vast or the opposition too entrenched, he would return to the heart of the forest, to the massive stump that had witnessed centuries of harm and healing. There, with his hands pressed against the ancient wood, he would remember the truth that had transformed him. The forest's patience was greater than any human resistance. The renewal had already begun, and he was no longer just Michael Bennett, heir to a corporate empire, but a bridge builder between worlds that had been separated for too long. From the ridge where he stood, he could just make out the settlement in the distance, a place that existed on no official maps, yet had changed the course of countless lives, including his own. Sarah would be there, guiding others as she had guided him. Lily would be watching, learning, growing into her own power. And the forest, ancient, patient, alive, would continue its work of renewal with or without human cooperation. But now at last it had allies in unexpected places. People with one foot in each world, carrying its wisdom into boardrooms and classrooms, laboratories and legislatures. People like Michael Bennett, who had entered the forest as a stranger and emerged as kin. "We're ready when you are, Mr. Bennett," called one of the architects from behind him. Michael touched the wooden emblem around his neck, took one last look at the vast green canopy, stretching to the horizon, and turned back to the task at hand. The work of renewal had only just begun. Dear listeners, we hope Michael Bennett's journey from corporate executive to forest guardian has moved you. This tale of rediscovery and reconnection reminds us that our true heritage often lies buried beneath the stories we tell ourselves. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories of transformation and awakening. Find it by clicking the link to your left. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Every day, we bring you unique narratives that explore the complexity of human experience and our relationship with the natural world. What would you do if you discovered your life was built on hidden truths? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We're listening just as the forest listens to those who are ready to hear its wisdom.